Hi, everyone. So I'm going to keep this really brief so we have plenty of time for Simon. And just quick introduction. We've been hoping to get Simon here to give this talk for a while now. You may know his work either at Yahoo or as one of the co-founders of Django, the web framework for developing content. And Simon is, in my eyes, one of this new generation of identity crusaders, people trying to break down the identity silos. And he's here to give a talk on maybe the most interesting one of those, OpenID. Simon Willison.
Okay. Does that work? Sweet. Oh, hold on. I'm going. Yep. Right. Good afternoon. So I've been thinking about and experimenting with OpenID for well over a year now, and I've basically convinced myself that it represents a major step forward in the way we do authentication on the web. Out of all of the options, it seems like the one that's most obviously correct and is most obviously actually going to go somewhere. And while OpenID itself is pretty straightforward, the implications of adopting it really aren't. And this is, there are a huge number of questions and issues that always come up when people are thinking about this stuff. So the format of this talk is essentially a series of question and answers. It's an FAQ. And like so many FAQs, I made up all of the questions myself, but I will be taking extra questions at the end of the session. So let's see if this clicker works. OK, so firstly, a question for you. Who here has used OpenID? That's a decent number. And who here actually uses it regularly? Like on a, yeah, hardly anyone at all. We're going to try and make that better. Like a lot of what I'm doing at the moment is trying to get people to adopt it, so those of us who use it have more stuff that we can do with it. So we'll start with the basics. What is OpenID? And I describe OpenID as a decentralized mechanism for single sign-on. So what problems does it solve? Well, there's a bunch of them. The first and the really obvious one is the too many passwords problem. We all have far too many accounts on far too many services which are protected by usernames and passwords. And of course, you should never use the same password on lots of different sites, because if one of them gets compromised, you lose all of them. But who can manage an individual password for everything they sign up for? And this is a problem which, OK, so some of us can, but you're a statistical anomaly, let's face it. So we've all got too many passwords, and as early adopters and technologists, this is a big problem for us, but it's going to be a problem. It's a problem for regular users soon, and if it isn't, regular users right now, and it'll be an even bigger problem for them as the stuff we do becomes even more pervasive. So that's problem number one. Second problem, someone also already grabs my username. You go to a site, it asks you to pick a username, and you try username after username, and they've all already been registered. And there's another problem which really affects those of us who have chosen to expose our lives online, and that's that my online profile is scattered across dozens of sites. I've got a Flickr account, a Twitter account, YouTube accounts. I've got accounts everywhere. And personally, I'd quite like to be able to tie those together into a more of an integrated whole. So that's what OpenID is. What is an OpenID? And an OpenID is quite simply a URL. Here are some of mine. I'm swillison.livejournal.com. I'm simonw.myopenid.com. simonwillison.net, which is a domain that I actually own. And thanks to AOL, I've got openid.aol.com/simonwillison, where Simon Willison is my AOL screen name. And in fact, 63 million people who have AOL accounts actually have OpenIDs already, and they probably just don't know about them. So that's what an OpenID is, but what can you do with one? And really, OpenID, you can only do one thing. It's very simple. You can claim that you own it. I can make an assertion to someone that I own simonwillison.net or I own swillison.livejournal.com. And then I can prove that claim. And for that reason, why is that useful? It's because you can use it for authentication. The fact that you are the only person who can assert ownership over a particular URL means you can use that fact to authenticate with services. So it might work like this. You go to a site, and the site goes, who the heck are you? And you go, well, I'm simonwillison.net. Prove it. Magic happens. This is, I'm going to be skipping most of the technical details because you're smart people, you can read the spec. OK, you're in. So I've logged into the site. So if it's doing single sign-on, it's a bit like Microsoft Passport. Well, it is. But firstly, you don't need to ask Microsoft permission to implement this on your site. And secondly, Microsoft don't get to own your credentials and the credentials of everyone else in the world, which, even if it's not Microsoft, that's still a little bit creepy. I don't know if that's what we want to happen. So who does get to own your credentials? Who gets to look after your identity for you? And with OpenID, you, the user, decide who that is. So you pick your own provider. You find a company or organization that you trust to run your OpenID for you, just like you do with email. And so does this mean I'm still giving somebody the keys to my kingdom? It does, but it can be someone you trust. And again, just like email, if you have the ability to run software on your own server, you can be your own OpenID provider. You can answer to no one. So how do you use this thing? And this is where the embedded videos will hopefully work. I'll show you. This is an example of signing into a site called Zoomer.com, which is an online photo sharing site. You go there, and Zoomer says, log in with your OpenID. So it gives you a box and asks you for your OpenID. So I'll enter my OpenID. I'll enter a LiveJournal one, swillison.livejournal.com. I click the button there, and I'm redirected back to my provider. So Zoomer says, OK, that's the OpenID. Who's the provider for this? It's LiveJournal. So they redirect me over to LiveJournal's site. LiveJournal says, you need to be logged in to grant another site permission to know your identity. So I'm going to log into LiveJournal using my regular LiveJournal username and password. And once I've logged in, LiveJournal asks me a question. It says, OK, now you're logged in. Another site on the web wants to validate your LiveJournal identity. Essentially, Zoomer wants to know who you are. Is this OK? And there are three options. I can say yes just this time. I can say yes always, or I can say no. I'm going to say yes always. And I'm redirected back to Zoomer, and I'm signed in with that LiveJournal account. So I've signed into Zoomer without having to give Zoomer a password. And that's it's kind of nice, but I still had to enter a username and password. It didn't actually save me any time. The nice thing about this is if I log out of Zoomer, because I'm now permanently logged into LiveJournal, I've got LiveJournal's cookie on my machine, should I try and log into Zoomer again, oh, so my users don't have to sign up for an account. Hang on. Oh, here we go. So now I'm signing out of Zoomer, and I go to sign in again. I really hope I've got that video in there. There we go. But this time, I'm already logged into LiveJournal, and I told LiveJournal that I always trust Zoomer. So when I click the button, instead of I get redirected to LiveJournal. You can see that happening if you look at the status bar. And then I get redirected straight back to Zoomer and logged in. So that's single sign-on, wherein you only enter your username. You don't enter a password at all. And the nice thing about OpenID is, in the same way that e-commerce sites have standard names for your address field and your postcode and so on, OpenID does the same thing. So your browser can even auto-complete that field for you. So does this mean that my users don't have to sign up for an account? Does this mean I'm basically saying, to hell with accounts, I'm not going to have any accounts, and hence I don't really have a database of the people using my service? Well, no, not necessarily. An OpenID actually tells you very little about a user. You don't know their name. You don't know their email address. You don't know if they're a person or some evil robot or a dog or anything. And so where do you get that information from? Well, obviously, you ask them, just like you would with a regular person who comes up and signs up for an account on your service. And OpenID can even help them answer your questions. This is another demo. This is a feature of OpenID called Simple Registration. And the myopenid.com provider lets you set up personas. So it lets you set up essentially collections of attributes about yourself. Here I've saved a persona with a nickname, a full name, and an email address. And now if I go to sign up for a site for the first time, Magnolia here is an online bookmark site. It gives me the option to sign up normally, or it lets me sign up with an OpenID. So I'll put in my simonwillison.myopenid.com address. I'm sent back here. And in addition to asking me if I want to sign into Magnolia, it also says Magnolia also wanted to collect your nickname and your email address and your full name. And I can say, yes, that's fine. Or if I don't want Magnolia to get those details, I can edit them. But again, I say that's OK. I click Allow Forever. I'm redirected back to Magnolia, but it pre-fills in some of the fields in the registration form. So it is just a smart way of, a simple way of pre-filling some fields, but it does help out with that initial account creation process. And again, create my account, go straight through, and now I've got a brand new account on Magnolia, but I didn't really have to, all I really had to do was enter my OpenID and click a couple of buttons. How do I tell if someone's an evil spam bot? Well, again, it's just like you would with a regular account. You challenge them with some kind of captcha. So how does OpenID actually work? What's really going on behind the scenes? Well, an OpenID is a URL, and at a URL you have a web page. In this case, simonwillison.myopenid.com is this rather unattractive page. They've actually redesigned since I took these screenshots. I'm telling you, this is an identity page. But if you view source on this page, you get this. You get a little link element saying link rel equals OpenID server, and href equals myopenid.com/server. And that link element is what turns a URL into an OpenID. So you go to a site, you say, I'm simonwillison.myopenid.com. a site fetches the HTML from that page, passes it, and looks for that link element, which tells them where your identity provider is. And at that point, they know who they're going to send you to. They then establish a shared secret with their identity provider. They use Diffie-Hellman key exchange for that. And that's because the site you're logging into and your provider may never have heard of each other, but they do need to transmit a little bit of information securely so that they know that you're not sat in the middle, like lying about, so that they can assert the claim that's being sent between the sites. The site redirects me to the identity provider. If I'm logged in now, I get redirected back. So that link tag is all that you need to turn a page into an OpenID and let the site you're signing into know where it should send you to check your identity. How does your identity provider know who you are? Well, so far I've shown you stuff with usernames and password, but OpenID deliberately doesn't specify how authentication with the provider should work. So while usernames and passwords are common, providers can use other methods if they want to. And providers are already experimenting with things like client SSL certificates that you install in your browser, out-of-band authentication via an SMS text message or an email or a Jabber message. People have worked with IP-based login restrictions. There's one guy that actually set up a dynamic DNS thing so that his OpenID provider would recognize if he was on his home network and let him straight in, but if he was somewhere else, it would ask him to authenticate. And people are working with secure ID key fobs, which I'm sure everyone here has one of those little things with a number that changes and is part of the two-factor authentication to get into an account. You could even have something that does no authentication at all. It just says yes to any question about who owns an OpenID. Like, just say yes. Why is that useful? Well, it's the OpenID equivalent of a site you may have seen called bugmenot.com. And bugmenot.com is a site you can go to and you can say, I need a username and password for NewYorkTimes.com, and it'll give you one. And the service exists because there are lots of sites out there that force you to register to access their content, but as a user, you don't care about that account. You get no value for it. You don't care if lots of other people use it. So people are already share username and password accounts. And OpenID, someone's built a service which does essentially the same thing. There's a site, jkg.in/OpenID, which will say yes to any request that comes in. And again, users give away their passwords today. This is just the OpenID equivalent of doing that. What do you do if you decide that you hate your provider? You've been using this OpenID provider for a while, and then they do something really creepy, and you decide you don't want to trust them anymore. Well, you can use your own domain name or a site that you own, and you can delegate to a provider that you trust. And I do exactly that on my own site. This is simonwillison.net. It's my blog. And if you view source on simonwillison.net, you can see it's got these magic lines, openid.server, to say that it's an OpenID, but also openid.delegate. And if I try and log into something with simonwillison.net, that site pulls back those tags, and it says, OK, well, his OpenID provider is livejournal.com, and the OpenID I need to check is actually swillison.livejournal.com. So instead of checking that I'm simonwillison.net, it'll go and check if I'm swillison.livejournal.com, and if I am, it'll let me sign in as simonwillison.net. The nice thing here is that if I decide I don't want to use livejournal.com anymore, I can switch to another provider, change those 2 lines of HTML on my page, and I can keep on using my OpenID while switching out the provider that I'm trusting with my identity. And support for delegation is a compulsory part of the OpenID spec, which really helps minimize lock-in and keep this thing truly decentralized. So everyone will end up with one OpenID that they use for everything. That's not actually the plan, and this is probably not going to happen. I mean, I, for one, have half a dozen OpenIDs already. I've shown you some of them so far. And this really ties into a bigger thing where people like to maintain multiple online personas. They've been doing that since people started using the internet on Usenet or whatever. You might have the persona you use for your professional things, which is tied to your real name and you use for going to conferences and whatever. You may have a social persona you use with your friends, which might be your sort of spin out from your MySpace page. You may have a secret persona that you use for doing things online that you don't necessarily want other people to know about. And OpenID actually makes it easier to manage these multiple personas. You create a separate OpenID for each one, because 3 accounts is still better than 3 dozen different accounts. And it makes it easier for you to keep track of which identity you're presenting to which particular site or service. Now, if an OpenID is just a URL, is there anything else interesting that you can do with it aside from signing into things? And, well, yes, there is. Different OpenIDs can express different things. And I think this is one of the things that makes OpenID so interesting. So I've shown you a bunch already, but my AOL OpenID embeds my AOL Instant Messenger screen name. So if I sign into a service with that, the service now knows how it can send me instant messages. Sun Microsystems recently launched an OpenID provider that's only available to Sun employees. So if you see an OpenID from openid.sun.com, you can be sure that the owner of that OpenID is one of Sun's 33,000 employees with access to that service. there are things you could potentially do. Last.fm, the music sharing service, knows and represents a bunch of stuff about your taste in music. So if they supported OpenID, you could say, if someone signs in with OpenID from Last.fm, I now know how to look up their taste in music and maybe provides personalized services around that. My LiveJournal OpenID, first up, it tells you where to find my blog, and by extension, it shows you where to find an RSS feed about me. But it also links through to a friend of a friend file that LiveJournal have, listing my friends on LiveJournal. And there's a service called doxory.com, which is already using this for contact import. You sign into doxory.com with a LiveJournal OpenID, and it'll look up your friends on LiveJournal, check if they're in the doxory.com system, and if they are, give you the option to friend them there as well. And personally, I think friend import is a killer app for OpenID and technologies like it. Why would you implement OpenID over all the other identity standards? Well, quite frankly, OpenID is dirt simple. The specification is about 2 pages long. I think conceptually it makes a great deal of sense. And also it follows the Unix philosophy of development, where OpenID, rather than taking on this enormous problem of identity, which can start massive debates that go on for years and never really get anything done, it picks one tiny little problem and solves that. With the idea being that you build this thing that solves one problem, then you build all of the other interesting stuff on that one basis. If you know your internet theory, OpenID is what people call a dumb network. So the internet's described as a dumb network because the internet knows nothing of the packets that it's transmitting from point A to point B. It knows that its job is to get data from one place to another, but it doesn't know what the data is. It doesn't know what it represents. And the internet is interesting because of all of the applications people build on the edges of that network that do know about data formats. And I think with OpenID, the same thing's going to happen, where OpenID is a very dumb protocol for saying this entity can assert ownership of this URL. But people will then start to build stuff on top of it that do interesting things around the edges without the OpenID specification needing to be changed at all. And also, many of the competing identity standards are now on board with OpenID. About a year and a half ago, a bunch of people who were working on competing standards for decentralized and URL-based identity got behind OpenID and sort of contributed their ideas to that. So at least from the point of view of the identity community, it's got some pretty major backing, and it really looks like it's going somewhere. But a fundamental problem that people have with single sign-on is, doesn't this mean that I'm putting all of my eggs in one basket? And surely that's a really bad idea. I mean, what someone steals my OpenID, they can steal everything. And this is absolutely true. And the bad news is that the chances are you already do this. And the chances are that people on the internet are already doing this because of the I forgot my password feature that you get on pretty much any website. And I forgot my password means your email account is already an SSO mechanism. If somebody stole my Gmail account, they could do a search for password reminders, and they'd find accounts from hundreds and hundreds of sites that I've coupled with that Gmail account. So OpenID really just makes it a little bit obvious that this is what people are doing. What about phishing? And I know this is the principal concern about OpenID for most people. And again, phishing is a major problem. It's a big problem with OpenID because, well, I'll show you an example. Let's say someone builds a site called ICanHasLolcats, and it's a service where people can go and create lolcats and have fantastic fun bothering their friends with them. And so here's that site. It goes, sign in with your OpenID. Like, yay, I don't even have to create an account here. So I enter my OpenID, click the button. It sends me to my identity provider. But actually, it's an evil lolcat site, and it serves up a fake edition of my identity provider. It pulls down the HTML, it rewrites the forms, serves as a different URL, but who looks at URLs? And so instead of lolcats, I get identity theft. And so the phishing stuff works because you go to an untrusted site, and it redirects you to supposedly your trusted provider. And this should sound familiar because PayPal do this, Yahoo browser-based authentication do this, Google Auth do this, and Google Checkout do this as well. So yeah, this is a problem. Phishing is a major problem. It's a problem that you guys already have and you really need to look into solving. OpenID does not change this in the slightest. There are a bunch of solutions. I mean, the OpenID community is thinking very hard about this, and a bunch of solutions have come up. One solution that people have is, since the problem is you redirect to a page where you authenticate, just don't let the user log in on the identity provider landing page. So I run an OpenID provider called idproxy.net, and if you attempt to sign in using OpenID to there, and you're not logged in, you'll get this screen instead. It says you need to sign in, you need to log into idproxy.net to complete this process. You should use a bookmark or type in the address to do this. This page does not contain any links to protect you from phishing. Now, This is not the solution to phishing, because a phishing site could serve up this page and say, new, improved usability, click here to enter your password, that kind of thing. And most people wouldn't know the difference. But from my point of view, I run this provider. I do know the difference, and I find this makes me a little bit more comfortable about using it, because if I forget to check the URL bar, I'm not going to get phished. There are better solutions. So one solution that's quite important these days is card space. Card space is a new thing built into Windows Vista, which I think is also available for Windows XP as part of some enormous service pack style .NET download. But card space is specifically designed to combat phishing, and it's a way of signing into a site where instead of entering a username and password, you click on the use card space thing, and card space then takes over your entire screen. It's like full page. The idea being that websites, like phishing sites, can't do that. I wonder if they could do that with Flash. I'm not sure. And so, but card space is Microsoft's big bet again, big gamble on solving the phishing problem. And this leads us through to another idea, which is native browser support for things like OpenID. Now, VeriSign are doing a lot of work with OpenID, and they've put out this Firefox extension called Seatbelts. And Seatbelts basically sits in your browser watching what you're doing, and it looks out for evidence that you're starting an OpenID transaction. And if you are, it makes damn sure that you're doing that against your identity provider and not some fake. And it gives you other little things like the Seatbelt toolbar will tell you if you're signed into your identity provider. It'll encourage you to sign into your provider first thing when you launch your browser. And that's really good news. And Mozilla have announced that Firefox 3 is going to have OpenID support. At least it's one bullet point on a massive list on their wiki. So hopefully in Firefox 3, they'll integrate something like Seatbelt, which will help deal with this problem. But on a less technical basis, I think one thing we're going to see is competition between providers as a driver for solutions to phishing and security. If you're looking for an OpenID provider, there are loads of them out there, and there are more every few months. And if those providers can convince you that they have better security, better phishing protection than the other providers, then that's one way that they can distinguish themselves and convince people to sign up for them. And again, we're already seeing this happen. MyOpenID.com, that I showed you earlier, recently launched client-side browser SSL certificates as a way of securing your OpenID. There's another concept I heard quite recently, which I think is very interesting, and that's using a permanent cookie set using an out-of-band token. So one great way of solving phishing is you do out-of-band authentication. When someone tries to sign in, you SMS text message them an authentication code, which they have to enter, so that then when they're trying to sign into a phishing site, they don't get the message and they can't continue. And what you can do is use that out-of-band token to set a permanent cookie in their browser, saying, OK, this browser has done that stage of authentication. And then you won't be bothering them with out-of-band messages in the future, but should they start using a different browser, you can send them a one-time message to set that browser up as authenticated. And they still have to log in normally, but a phishing site which never got hold of that cookie wouldn't be able to sign into your system. So I think that's something people really need to start looking at. What are best practices for OpenID consumers, for sites that people log into with OpenID? Well, the first one is that you need to keep onto that I forgot my password thing. But you need to offer it as, I can't sign in using my OpenID, so there's something wrong. And that's so that when someone's provider goes down, they can still log into your site. If they forget who their OpenID provider is, which could potentially happen, they can still log in as well. You also, one thing that's very important I forgot to make a slide for, is that providers shouldn't be replacing usernames and passwords with OpenID, because doing so means 95% of your audience won't have the slightest idea how to use your service. OpenID doesn't replace usernames and passwords, it provides an alternative to them. So the site I showed you earlier, Magnolia, the sign-in page says, log in with your username and password, and then underneath it says, if you've got an OpenID, you can log in with that instead. And I think that's definitely the way people need to adopt this stuff. I said you should allow people to associate OpenIDs. I actually think you should allow people to associate multiple OpenIDs with a single account on a site. And there are a bunch of reasons to do that. Firstly, again, people can still sign in if one of their providers is down. If LiveJournal's down, I'll sign in with my MyOpenID.com account, and I can still get to my account. It also means people can unassociate an OpenID without locking themselves out, which is quite useful. But most importantly, it means you can take advantage of these site-specific services around each of their OpenIDs. If you've got a single account on your site, and people have signed in into that account using an AOL account, so you know their AOL screen name, and they've signed in with the Last.fm account, so you know their taste in music, you can start gathering more information and more services about that single user in your system. Are there any other neat tricks you can do this stuff? Well, there's a ton of these. And OpenID is at its core single sign-on, but because it provides a URL, because it provides a globally unique identifier for your users, you can build a stack of interesting things on top of it. The first one of these, and I think this is the killer app, is the portable contact list that I talked about earlier with respect to friend of a friend. And there's also work going around microformats of this stuff. So an OpenID takes you to a page with a microformat XFN list. XFN is a way of listing your friends. And a site can then pass that, pull out those friends, and import them into your new system. So you don't have to go through that rigmarole of signing up for a new social software site and instantly adding hundreds of people that you know just to try out the service. Here's a great problem which you guys have, and that's that Facebook and lots of other sites currently ask for the user's Google username and password just so they can sign into their Gmail account and look at their contact list. And I don't need to tell you why that's a horrible idea. The sooner the internet can come up with a standard that means people aren't doing that, the better. And the damage, in a way, the damage is already being done in teaching users that it's OK to give your username and password to any site that asks for it. But back to cool things you can do with OpenID. Another one which I really like is this idea of lightweight accounts. Services where you'd never normally sign up for an account because it's like commenting on someone's blog or whatever, but you are willing to sign in with an OpenID. And so I think that, and in that respect, OpenID ends up acting as basically a way of making persistent cookies. So whereas there are preferences that you'd save in a cookie normally, but the cookie would eventually expire or the user would switch to another machine, if you instead associate those preferences with their OpenID, then you've got the same kind of data you'd store in a cookie, but it can be persisted across any time they log in with the same OpenID. Another thing you can do is pre-approved accounts. Let's say I set up a collaborative weblog for members of my band, and then rather than sending them all an email saying, I've set up a new WordPress install, you guys should log in and set a password and all of that, you pre-approve their OpenIDs. You stick in the list of the 4 OpenIDs of the band members, and then you can say to them, hey, I've set up a blog and you guys can all log in already. In a way, it's like having a public key for SSH authentication, which you distribute to anyone so they can put it on their server and you can log in without you having to do anything else extra. Another thing for OpenID is social whitelists. So I do this on my own weblog. I've got a comment spam filtering system, which has a bunch of weird rules in it. But one of the rules is that if you post the comment and you're signed in with an OpenID that I've already approved, you skip the entire comment spam system. And what's nice there is I can publish that list of people. I can publish the list of the 30 or so OpenIDs that I trust to post comments on my site. And then anyone else can say, well, I'm going to let anyone post on my site who Simon lets post on his site. So we can build these whitelists and start distributing them and sharing them across lots of people. And hopefully that'll help tide at least some of the masses of comment spam that everyone's getting. OpenID and microformats I mentioned earlier, the idea of having XFN there. But really, with microformats mean that you have data on a page that can be extracted out. And OpenID is a great way of essentially doing lookups for microformats. So you say, here's my OpenID, you can prove ownership over it. The site can then go to that OpenID and suck any and every microformat out of that page. So it fits in with microformats really nicely. And a much bigger idea is this concept of decentralized social networks. And there's a nice quote from a guy called Gary McGraw, who said, people keep asking me to join the LinkedIn network, but I'm already part of a network. It's called the internet. And what I want to see happen is services based around OpenID but coming up with ways of doing the same sort of convenience that you get from centralized social networking services like Facebook and MySpace and so on, but in a decentralized manner. So we don't end up all relying on one provider for all of our online social networky interactions. But back to questions about OpenID. There's a question that you hear a lot, and actually this is probably one of the scariest things for people who are thinking about implementing OpenID as a consumer, is doesn't having OpenID mean I'm outsourcing the security of my users to untrusted third parties? My site security could be amazing, but if my users sign up with some completely untrustworthy OpenID provider, their accounts are going to get stolen and I can't do anything about it. And well, yes, it does. But again, so do these forgotten password emails. Like I said earlier, forgotten password, you go there, you click, I forgot my password, it emails you a one-time token. And so right there, you're outsourcing the security of your site to whoever the user has chosen as their email provider. I'm not saying this is an ideal situation, but it does at least mean that if you're willing to put a I've forgotten my password link on your site, you should be willing to adopt OpenID. The threat model is essentially the same. So if email is secure enough for, email is secure enough for your user authentication, then so is OpenID. And really, password emails, these forgotten your password things, are actually SSO already. They're just SSO with a deliberately bad user experience. What are the privacy implications of this stuff? This is the other question that comes up frequently. And well, there's a bunch of these, but the most obvious one is cross-correlation of accounts. If I'm using an OpenID in lots of different services, someone or something could tie, or some crawler could tie together all of those accounts and build up a huge profile of my activity online. And I think there's an important lesson for OpenID consumer sites, is that you should never publish a user's OpenID without making it abundantly clear that you're going to do that. Like, I will trust a site. I'm OK with Flickr, with different blogs posting my OpenID so I can tie my comments together. But at the same time, I need to know that that's going to happen. You should, at the very least, you should allow users to opt out of sharing their OpenID. So if you sign up for a forum, you can if you sign up for a forum, you can either say, yeah, display my OpenID under the posts I make, or you can pick a username distinctly for that forum. Is this going to lead to the online equivalent of a credit reporting agency if you can tie these different things together? And yet again, this is already a problem with email. Right now, today, a bunch of sites could conspire against their users and cross-correlate their email addresses and build up a massive profile. And I'm not a lawyer, but I'm pretty sure the legal protections against that kind of thing already exist, be it in the form of privacy laws, data protection laws, or just the ridiculous privacy agreements that nobody reads and everyone clicks straight through. So again, it's not a new problem. And there's a new feature in OpenID 2.0 called directed identity that aims to solve this problem. With directed identity, when you sign in with an OpenID, instead of entering your OpenID, you enter the URL of your provider. And the provider then invents a one-time OpenID that only works for your account on that one site. So at the very least, the sites can't correlate you. Your identity provider still knows all of the places you're signing into, but at least they can't correlate your OpenID and figure out that your accounts are the same. Patents are always scary, and there's some good news on this front because both Sun Microsystems and VeriSign have announced what's called a patent covenant. And again, I'm certainly not a patent lawyer, but my interpretation of this is that both those organizations have said that they won't smack you down with their patents if you're implementing stuff around OpenID 1.1. And maybe more importantly, they will smack down anyone else who tries to assert their patents against OpenID. So patents are basically this ridiculous Cold War. But at least OpenID has a couple of massive allies on its side looking out for it. Who else is involved with this stuff? Well, this is a slide I stole from David Recordon, who does a lot of talks about OpenID, showing the total relying parties, that is, consumer sites you can log into using an OpenID, according to one provider, myopenid.com, which is one of the more popular providers. And you can see that adoption has been going up. It's a pretty healthy-looking adoption curve. There are now around about 3,500 sites you can sign into with OpenID. And if the trend continues, we're going to see that number keep on increasing, especially as open source projects like Movable Type 4, which is becoming open source, now has support for OpenID. So it'll get increasingly easy for people to create new sites that you can sign into with an OpenID. One major backer of OpenID is AOL. AOL quietly set themselves up as an OpenID provider back in February, the thing where any of the 63 million AOL user accounts work as OpenIDs. And they have announced at a conference in Paris a few weeks ago that they're going to be a full consumer by the end of July. So any AOL service that you can sign into with a free account, you'll be able to use an OpenID instead. And that's pretty exciting. On the Microsoft front, Bill Gates expressed Microsoft's interest at the RSA conference, again, a few months ago. And unfortunately, I haven't really found anyone who understands quite what that means. As far as we can tell, it's mainly as good PR for their card space thing. He could say, Microsoft really like OpenID, and with the addition of card space, it'll be secure from phishing. So, but at least they've shown interest. I mentioned Sun Microsystems, who have this patent covenant, and they have 33,000 employees who have Sun-only OpenIDs. So they're already pushing the boundaries on what it means to have an OpenID. One thing I forgot to put a slide in for was the country of Estonia. Estonia, a few years ago, introduced electronic ID cards for their 1.5 million population. And quite recently, evidently someone in the Estonian government is quite forward-thinking. He said, well, we've got these ID cards. Let's do an OpenID provider as well. So pretty soon, you'll see people signing in for an Estonian OpenID provider that proves their name, their first name, their last name, and that they're an Estonian citizen. And that's like That's pretty mind-blowing, but it's really interesting to see that kind of stuff happening already. 6 Apart actually invented OpenID. OpenID was invented by Brad Fitzpatrick of LiveJournal, and it's built into a lot of 6 Apart products. A LiveJournal is an OpenID, a TypeKey and Vox accounts are both OpenIDs. You can sign into some of their stuff with OpenID, although not as much as I'd like. And they've recently announced OpenID support for movable type 4, so that'll, again, will really help push adoption in sites that you can sign into. VeriSign, I mentioned VeriSign's seatbelt stuff. David Recordon, who's one of the principal editors of the OpenID spec, is a full-time VeriSign employee, and they've got their own OpenID provider as well. There's a company called Janrain, which you may not have heard of, but they're pretty important because they're based in Portland, Oregon, and they're responsible for basically 90% of the OpenID libraries, the open source libraries that people use for integrating OpenID. So if you're building sites in Ruby, Python, PHP, you could go to these guys and get a fully formed, really nicely, really well-tested library to help you implement OpenID. Now, Yahoo, who I used to work for, supporting OpenID, but only indirectly. And this is a hack that I built back in January called idproxy.net. And what idproxy.net does, it's an OpenID provider, but instead of you creating an account there, you sign into it using your Yahoo account through Yahoo's browser-based authentication. And really, I did this more to prove a point than anything else. And the point was that if you're going to do some kind of authentication API, if you're going to do Yahoo BBAuth or Google Auth or whatever, you may as well support OpenID as well, because if you don't, somebody like me will crop up and build a middleman in the middle. I actually know of one of these, of a similar site that does this for Google accounts as well. I just don't think the guy's quite wrapped it up for release just yet. So yeah, Google, that's the big question. Are you guys going to do OpenID? And I think there's a bunch of great reasons to do it, but there's the fact that someone else will do it for you. There's the, yeah. I mean, I was quite tempted to just... the original version of idproxy.net actually used Google authentication, but your auth API doesn't really support single sign-on. At the time, I had to ask for permission to access the user's calendar, even though I had no interest in their calendar. So I found that a bit creepy and ended up not launching that. But there's a bunch of things within Google that OpenID is really well suited for. There's things like if you're editing Google documents, maybe you want to share that document with a bunch of people. So you could, instead of the thing you do at the moment, you could say, well, these 5 OpenIDs have the ability to see this document using the account pre-approval stuff. And again, you have your authentication API. When you solve the phishing problems and stuff for that, it would be really great to have a Google OpenID provider that people could start trusting and building other stuff on top of. Now, if you want to know more about this stuff, OpenID.net is the user-unfriendly but developer-friendly home of the specifications. OpenIDenabled.com is a site that links through to the open source libraries for all of these different languages, so you can start playing with that. And I'm a bit of an OpenID magpie. I collect stuff about it from all over the place and stick it up online at simonwillison.net/tags/OpenID. And I've managed to leave 15 minutes for questions, so thank you very much. OK, there's a question right there at the front.
Why now? Why didn't this happen 5 years ago?
I would love to know the answer to that. Why now? Why didn't this happen 5 years ago? I have no idea. 5 years ago, I was still in school. No, 5 years ago, I was just starting university. I think people had already tried this stuff with Passport and so on, but what they'd missed is the importance of it being decentralized. No one's going, and like 6 Apart had their type key thing, but nobody wants to trust one single provider that sits in the middle and controls everyone's identity. And I think with OpenID, it is an idea where you look at it and you think, that's so obvious. How could someone not have come up with it already? But as it was Brad Fitzpatrick that first put the proposal together back in 2005. And since then, it's been quietly brewing away, and people have been poking at it and experimenting with it and eventually getting excited about it. And I think it's about time that it broke out and really started getting popular. There's a question there at the front.
What about Kerberos?
I know nothing about Kerberos, really. So I won't take that question. Sorry. Ones who are in the blue shirt?
So if a hacker, a man in the middle, or something were to change the
DNS?
delegation identity provider link in your site to be the one that accepts everything, does that suddenly mean everybody can sign in as you?
Yes, it does. And actually, and this really scared me a few weeks ago when DreamHost, who are a really popular website host, lost 3,500 FTP passwords to in undisclosed circumstances. And that was pretty scary because, yeah, if any of those people had been hosting an OpenID and their password got out, then their page could be changed. And this is why I think it's important that companies with really good reputations for security start supporting this stuff. Like, I run my OpenID off my own little virtual server, and I can't say for sure that it's secure. But if Google were hosting my OpenID and promoting the fact that they're really good at security, that would be a great thing for the standard. And again, but yet again, it ties back to email. Like, somebody could crack my email account and steal all of my forgotten password reminder protected things. Yeah, I really should start doing that. There is a delete button in Gmail now, so maybe I should start using it. There in the brown shirts.
So when you were describing it before you answered the question about 2.0, the first thing I thought of is, gee, I'm going to want a dynamic number of these which are randomized and all focus back to the same underlying ID.
Absolutely.
What's the status of 2.0?
Oh, I was almost hoping people wouldn't ask that. So 2.0 is an ongoing effort to incorporate. It's got some great ideas in it, like this directed identity stuff, but it's also it's a bit of a result of all of these different identity standards getting together a year and a half ago. And as a result, it's quite big. It's a lot bigger than OpenID 1.1. There's stuff in there which personally I'm not at all excited about. And so I'm kind of hoping that the directed identity bit from 2.0 will be backported to 1.1 and maybe to create 1.2. I know people are talking about doing that because that's a feature I really want, but there's other stuff in 2.0 which a lot of people aren't quite as excited about. Just in front there.
It seems like, as a consumer, why would I want to allow any OpenID provider? Wouldn't it make more sense to be a whitelist of providers that I think are reasonable?
So the question there is, as a consumer, why would I want to allow any OpenID provider? Wouldn't it make more sense to whitelist just the ones that I trust? And I think you're absolutely right. Now, there are people within the OpenID community who will shoot down that idea as being against the spirit of OpenID. I couldn't disagree more. I think OpenID, like I said, it's a dumb network. It's up to people at the edges how they use this standard and what use they make of it. And if you want to whitelist a list of OpenID providers who you've sort of audited and you trust their security, then I think you should be allowed to do that. At the same time, it's back to the forgotten password thing. There are sites that won't let you sign up with a Hotmail account because they think you're more likely to be a spammer. So, and I think really with OpenID, you can start whitelisting accounts, and that would be fine. But again, you want to be pretty inclusive, because at the end of the day, you want people to sign into your service, and if you tell them they can't sign in because they used the wrong provider, they'll get upset and they'll go away, and they won't try out your thing. There is one thing that I've been thinking about recently is the case of banks. Now, banks do not offer a click here to be emailed your password thing, presumably because they don't want to outsource the security of your account to your email provider. And so I think for that, so I said anyone who does that should be willing to support OpenID. That means that banks shouldn't be willing to support it. But yeah, if there are providers that do two-factor authentication and are certified and so on, then why shouldn't the banks whitelist just those and say, yeah, you can use OpenID, but it has to be from this list of a dozen or so providers which we know are really well secured.
Just a comment on that. You could actually also, the bank could require you always to have an OpenID first, and then they won't even talk to you without one if they really want to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be great. I'd love my bank to be an OpenID. Well, presuming they upped their security, which is a bit weak at the moment. I don't know if I think UK banks have just started to send out those key fobs, which I'd love to get because I think that's a really good idea. There.
You mentioned earlier that OpenID can pre-populate some forms when signing up to sites. That still has the problem of decentralizing your profiles. Are there any efforts to centralize that?
Yes, absolutely. So the question was, OpenID can help you fill out a form on a site, but you're still you're still copying your data all over the place. If you ever change your surname, then you have to go and update it everywhere. And yeah, absolutely, people are working on this stuff. There's an emerging standard for OpenID called Attribute Exchange, which is currently being working on, which takes the simple registration thing and extends it and means that you can pass pretty much any data you like back and forth. And again, you could invent your own scheme for that right now on top of OpenID, and it would work, but it's no good if other people aren't using it. So I think there's a lot of room for people to get involved with helping build the specifications for that kind of stuff. Kevin.
Well, follow up to that one. The other thing is because OpenID authenticates URL, a URL you can then make queries against to find other information from. So you can use MUD formats embedded in the page, or you can use it as an APT endpoint, do a GData query or something against it. You can basically validate these URL system, and therefore you're a place to get further information from.
Yeah. Right there.
So what about using OpenID on applications that aren't web-based? So I mean, like
right.
Subversion or email or any of those things.
So that's a really great question. The question was, what about using OpenID on applications that aren't web-based, so desktop applications and Subversion things and so on? And there isn't a great story for this yet. Like I said, OpenID chose to solve one very small problem, and that problem was web-based authentication. But actually, yeah, it's very relevant. People want to do that kind of stuff. Now, there are some crazy hacks. There are people who've got Subversion, command-line Subversion authentication working, where when you try to authenticate with Subversion, it launches a local web server and then fires up your browser and does the redirection thing to your local web server and then shuts it down again. And that works, but yeah, it's not ideal. I think it's an ongoing question how that's going to happen, but the more people involved with that and the more demand there is for that, the more chance that somebody will come up with a decent solution. Right there in the light blue.
So you mentioned a couple of the big issues with OpenID that scare big organizations. You're putting all your eggs in one basket and phishing. Another one is usability. Usability studies really show that the average person doesn't yet get typing in a URL instead of a username and password.
Okay, so the question there is usability. The average user doesn't get typing in a URL instead of a username and password. Now, I hear this argument a lot. One thing I will say is most users, they have no idea what a URL is, but you ask them what their MySpace page is, and they'll tell you it's www.myspace.com/whatever. So they understand the concept of a URL as an identity, even if they don't get even if they don't get the implications of that. Now, from the point of view of OpenID, one thing I want to see people start doing, and I've considered doing already, is rather than you say, sign in with your OpenID, or if you have a LiveJournal URL, paste it in here, or if you have a MySpace account, type in your MySpace ID, or if you have an AOL account, type in your AOL ID. And of course, I'm not so much a usability person, but of course what you're doing there is someone gives you an AOL thing, and you whack openid.aol.com on the front, and it just works. So again, it is a problem, and it's something which there are smart people in the world who solve that kind of problem all the time. So I think it's surmountable. You just need the right people doing the work to explain it to people and show how it all works. Are there any more questions? One right at the front.
So devil's advocate, what about the issue of OpenID identifier recycling?
Oh, that's I actually meant to talk about that. So yeah, there's an issue, OpenID identifier recycling. And this is where, again, this relates to what if someone else gets hold of my domain or whatever. I'm sure you guys do this. Loads of people with a really big username database do this. They've got like 100 million accounts. All of the good accounts are gone. Somebody hasn't signed in for 5 years. So you make their identifier available for someone else to register again. And obviously that means that person can then like log into any accounts they'd use with OpenID. Now there are a couple of things I'll say about that. The first is, obviously with identifier recycling, you do only do it after like a 5-year gap. At least I hope you do. But what you could do is say, if you've got a user database that isn't primarily for OpenID, you could say, OK, we do identifier recycling, but if you've ever signed into anything with an OpenID, then we don't. We stick that on that we're not going to recycle this list. So that's part of the solution. Again, a defense you can come down to is that this already exists with email. If you're doing identifier recycling on my email address, then someone else gets my email address, and they can use forgotten passwords to steal all of my old accounts. So it's not ideal, but it's a wider problem than just OpenID.
I'm curious, nowadays a lot of sites are using your email address as your login ID, and they have a password. Are there any numbers on how many people might be using exactly the same username and password on every single site that they sign into?
I have absolutely. Well, I don't know about numbers of people using the same username and password on every site they're signing to. I imagine it's huge. One thing that's really interesting is, MySpace had 35,000 of their user accounts stolen in the phishing thing last year. It's a great attack because what happened is somebody wrote a little bit of CSS that put their own sign-in link and absolutely positioned it over MySpace's sign-in link and used that to steal accounts, which I thought was quite ingenious. But But the 35,000 accounts that were stolen were actually then circulated widely. So you can get hold of this database of 35,000 accounts and use it to analyze what kind of passwords people are using. And Bruce Schneier wrote something up on this a while back where he pointed out that people are actually using quite good passwords. Like, a lot of the passwords were 7 characters or more, a lot of them mixed uppercase. So people's passwords are a lot better. But yeah, as for numbers of people using the same username and password, I have no idea. I imagine it's huge, but I haven't seen a study.
Partially in response to that, only because I happen to know some of these things. Just draw two different studies and the Bruce Schneier thing you just mentioned.
I'd love to talk to you about this later then.
But one is that the average user has 18 accounts at different sites, and the average user has 3.49 passwords. So that's how much password reuse there is.
Okay, and that was if people didn't hear, that was the average user has 18 user accounts and 3.49 passwords. Yeah.
As to the Bruce Schneier thing, yes, you did say it was kind of encouraging, but the most common password in that list was still password 1.
Yeah. Although it was a very small percentage of users that had it. It was the most common, but still, it was a small percentage. Are there any more questions? In that case, I think I'll wrap things up. Thanks a lot. I'll be around for quite a while if you want to talk to me about this afterwards. So thank you.
Thank you.